Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Beeman, and today I will be giving a briefing on our team's progress on our project for the NAACP on advancing racial justice and federal flood infrastructure projects. I'd first like to thank my entire team for their hard work on this, as well as thank our faculty advisor, Arlene McGinnis, for her guidance and support. I'll begin today with a description of our client. Second, I'll discuss what problem we are trying to solve. Third, I will detail our research process and methodology, then identify some challenges and opportunities we have come across so far, highlight our progress to date, and finally describe next steps for our project. We're extremely honored to introduce our capstone client and partner, the NAACP. Most of us have heard of the NAACP. They are the oldest and largest civil rights organization in the country, with over 2,000 local chapters, now called units, and over 2 million member activists fighting to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure health and well-being of all persons. For this capstone, we are excited to work alongside the NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice team, led by Jackie Patterson and Mandy Lee, as well as with the support of local units in Louisiana, Texas, and Oregon, to advance equity and racial justice in federal flood infrastructure projects, specifically programs administered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So what problem are we trying to solve? When communities experience natural disasters, a recent 2018 study determined that on average, white individuals accumulate $75,000 in wealth, whereas Black individuals lose $50,000 in wealth. But how does that happen? This stark contrast is the result of an equitable and unjust allocation of federal resources after a natural disaster. The studies are part of a growing body of literature that are illuminating the injustices in how aid is distributed to low-wealth communities of color after disasters such as major flooding. For our project with NAACP, we were actually focused on the precursor to this, specifically examining the structural inequities and injustices that exist before natural disasters hit. There is a need to identify opportunities and barriers that exist for frontline low-wealth communities of color to receive federal flood infrastructure that would help close this wealth gap and ensure that they are protected from flooding disasters. The NAACP has requested that we focus on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the cost-benefit analysis they use to prioritize flood infrastructure projects, which predominantly includes levees and dams, as well as more recent nature-based infrastructure such as wetlands. Their cost-benefit analysis has historically prioritized metrics like property value and economic development, thus raises many concerns about equity and justice in flood infrastructure planning. We are learning that decisions about who and what gets prioritized for federal flood protection projects is quite complicated due to the bureaucracies and processes in place. This can make it very difficult for communities to advocate for themselves and the flood protection they need. This is even more difficult and complicated if you're underrepresented in the political process. So our two main project goals is to first decipher how are these decisions made and how these decisions further entrench racial and socioeconomic inequities, particularly in Black communities. Second, how can communities use this knowledge to successfully advocate for themselves to be prioritized for Army Corps federal flood protection projects? In terms of our research process, our first task was to refine our research questions and scope of the project in collaboration with our engaged partners at NAACP to help meet their needs. From there, in order to tackle this multifaceted problem and to generate comprehensive research and analysis for our clients, our team needed to divide into 4 main focus areas: federal policy, local policy and case studies, nature-based solutions, and data analysis and visualization. The federal policy team has done a thorough literature review of the federal policies and associated decision-making processes. And our local policy team has been thinking about the local application of these processes in St. Louis, New Orleans, and Indianapolis. The nature-based solutions team is investigating nature-based infrastructure and identifying how communities can advocate for this infrastructure over traditional systems such as levees and dams. Finally, our data team is using GIS analysis to understand the trends in the relationships among race, socioeconomic status, levee protected areas, and flood exposure. So to help fill in gaps and ensure that we are getting a variety of insights for our research and policy recommendations, we will also be using expert interviews from a range of perspectives, from the Army Corps, as well as from community advocacy and environmental justice groups, local governments, data analysis experts, and nonprofits. So one of the largest challenges we faced as a group is aligning client needs with team capabilities, especially balancing the expectations and goals from the national office and the local units. In order to support our recommendations, we also face the challenge of finding illustrative and compelling case studies to help inform NAACP's advocacy and raise awareness. The data component of our project has also been challenging due to data limitations and availability. Our data team met with NAACP last week on determining what kind of analysis is most useful for them, a forward-looking analysis to see how current levy locations will generate inequities, or a historical analysis about levy location and how communities have been impacted in the past. We are leaning towards the forward-looking analysis based on client feedback so far. We have come across many opportunities in our research. In one of our early interviews with a representative from Army Corps, we learned that there are new policy directives within the Army Corps for potentially improved criteria that address race, socioeconomic status, and human health within the Army Corps' preliminary analysis of a flood project. As one Army Corps representative put it, the Army Corps is like an aircraft carrier. When it's moving on the ground, it takes a lot of effort to turn, but when it does turn, large-scale changes can happen. We see this as an opportunity for NAACP and an opening for more effective advocacy, which will give value to our analysis when we advise our client on what gaps to address within the Army Corps' decision-making process. So far, we have done a deep dive into literature and analyzed major studies and government reports on the U.S. Army Corps cost-benefit analysis and project selection criteria, as well as on our local case studies. We are learning that there are some gaps in the literature, such as there's only a handful of research done specifically on equity outcomes of U.S. Army Corps cost-benefit analysis, as well as not much publicly accessible data on this. We've also had 2 client meetings so far, which has helped refine the scope of the project to better support the local NAACP units working towards equitable flood infrastructure planning. Finally, we have met with several expert stakeholders on the topic to gain different perspectives, as well as heard from New Orleans activists on their lived experiences with flood injustices. Last week, we attended a movie screening and discussion featuring New Orleans Lower Ninth Ward resident and filmmaker Kimberly Rivers Roberts, who had filmed her experiences through Hurricane Katrina. Our team valued hearing from her directly about her experiences and activism on flood issues. Our next step to develop a useful report and guide for our client to use in national and local advocacy efforts is as follows. We will need to clearly explain and visualize the Army Corps flood infrastructure project decision-making process, as well as identify the key stakeholders in this process. Within this analysis, we plan on identifying where equity considerations may fall short and where national and local units of NAACP can influence the process. Second, we will provide NAACP with maps that identify some case studies and provide data on which communities are prioritized as a result of the benefit cost analysis and project selection. In addition to the data portion of the case studies, we will also provide policy analysis and research to illustrate successes and challenges in developing more equitable local flood mitigation projects for use by the local units. Finally, we will provide information and help raise awareness on nature-based solutions and alternatives for flood mitigation projects. And we will be delivering all this information in the form of a final report and briefing to the NAACP. So we're really excited to continue this work over the rest of the semester and are looking forward to sharing our findings in April. I'd be happy to take any questions, and thank you for listening.
Excellent work. Great job, Anna. Great job, team. Okay, Stephanie will again recognize questioners.
Yes. All right, Leanne, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, kind of going off Tunde's question earlier, on the last presentation, obviously, like with Katrina, New Orleans makes sense as a case study. I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on the other cities that you chose and why, or even speak a little more to New Orleans as well.
Sure. Yeah, so the client specifically wanted us to focus on the Gulf Coast and Midwest regions, but we specifically picked these cities because they were among the cities with the most sort of complete data for the metrics that we were examining, but also say that these 3 cities also have predominantly Black communities, They all have levees, but kind of range in terms of which communities the levees protect and which communities are flood exposed. So that is interesting for analysis and we think would be useful for NAACP.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, Louisa, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Great job. I just wanted to ask a quick question. I know in the beginning, I thought you were kind of also looking at other flood infrastructure projects, but then your strategy kind of looks as if you're only looking at levees. So are you just looking at levees, or are there other flood infrastructure projects that you're focusing on?
Yeah, so this is something we had to sort of navigate as a team as well. So I would say most of the data that's available is on levees, which is a data limitation, but definitely still yields important information about inequities. But also say that we're also looking at nature-based infrastructure, and we've heard from the Army Corps that they're interested in these types of solutions and are trying to move towards that direction. So we thought that that would also be a useful part of our analysis to NAACP.
All right, our last question's from Griffin.
Hi, Anna. Great presentation. I'm curious about one of the slides that you had in the presentation that showed that after a disaster, white residents there's a positive gain in wealth, whereas Black residents have a negative a loss of wealth. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that. I spent some time thinking about it after it was a very compelling figure.
Yeah, sure. So this study actually came from a study in 2018. This was a study that focused on the FEMA benefit cost analysis. But there has been also studies, on US Army Corps benefit cost analysis. And I think, as I mentioned, that benefit cost analysis prioritizes property value pretty strongly historically, as well as economic development, not even just for the local area, but for the country as a whole. So there is a recognition sort of like within Army Corps, we're seeing that there needs to be change and they're trying to figure out sort of right now how to do that change. So yeah, I can definitely send you the study if you're interested to read it more, but that one I would say was more a FEMA related cost benefit analysis.